Hey folks, welcome to Queer Link episode 23. My name is Ree. I use they, them pronouns. Today I'm speaking with Preston Souza. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Can you tell us a little about yourself?
Yeah, so like you said, my name is Preston. My pronouns are they, them, or she, her. I identify as non-binary or trans, and my sexuality, I identify as queer.
Love that. You have a very interesting story. And I understand that you grew up in a small town in Rhode Island, second generation Portuguese, Catholic. How was that coming out to your family?
Yeah, it's a very tight-knit family. I always like to put it in perspective for people and use the reference of My Big Fat Greek Wedding. I don't know if you've seen that movie, but that was pretty much my life growing up. Think about like I had 30 bajillion cousins and we would roast pigs in the front yard and everyone was screaming in Portuguese. It was a very traditional Portuguese experience. So to be a queer child, I definitely required me to kind of carve out this space for myself. So I feel like I am kind of continuously coming out to that part of my family. And it's still forever going. I came out as gay when I was 17, came out as non-binary at I think it was 24. And then now I just turned 28 on Sunday. And I am in the process of coming out to my family as trans.
And how are you feeling about that?
Really good. I mean, it's the process of coming out is very difficult, and I think I've kind of gone through waves emotionally through the process. I am coming out to my family because as of just recently, I decided to start gender-affirming care or hormone replacement therapy. I started my journey on January 4th of 2021. So this is month number 3 for me. It's a big benchmark. And so now that I'm at this sort of goal for myself, this benchmark, I thought it was about time that I bring my family into this experience. At first, I was a little protective of my space on this journey. I wasn't really ready for outside opinions. Yeah. I knew this was something that I wanted to do, and whether I had their support or not, it was going to do it. Although their acceptance is appreciated, it's not required. So I've decided to kind of come out to my family through a series of letters. I started with my sister, who is queer identifying as well. I like to explain them as the masculine to my feminine. We are two sides of the same coin. We used to lie and say we were twins and people believed us. It's really great to have a queer sibling who has a view of gender fluidity that aligns with mine. So they were the first person that I sort of came out to, aside from my cousin Lauren. And then I came out to my dad, and I think the hardest one is going to be my mother, which is the letter that I'm actually currently working on. I was just telling you before we started recording that I'm literally in the process of writing this letter because tomorrow is Trans Day of Visibility, and it's very important to me that on that day I step into my truth completely. So yeah, it's been a process. I get frustrated sometimes that we have to come out. I hate that this process can be very traumatizing and difficult, but reversely, the more that I come out, the more I feel so secure in my identity, and the more that I find that I have the language to speak to what I'm feeling. I think that was something that didn't exist for me early on, was having the language to express myself. So it's a two-sided coin. It's both difficult, but it has its blessings.
Of course. And do you find that since having another queer sibling, just being able to like open that, new dialogue, and have you found that like your relationship has gotten stronger?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there has always been a level, because of our queerness, there's always been this level of just this unsaid understanding. I think as a trans person, I am, and even as a, as a non-binary and trans person, I always have felt uncomfortable about the fact that I it's sometimes required that you need to give context to your identity, to your
Mm,
gender, you have to explain the why you use they them pronouns or why you use she her pronouns, why you decided to transition. And these are things that are so personal to people that I think, to be questioned on those things can be really difficult. And
mm,
my sister was the only person who did not require a context,
mm,
who, oh, I'm gonna get emotional, but yeah, the only person that really did not require me to have to say anything
mm.
about it. She was just accepting.
I love that. And in the context of your transition, can you talk a little bit, for example, about how it was like for you kind of choose finding a doctor and kind of like choosing your treatment plan?
Yeah, I think, I've worked in the LGBTQ space for years, and I've really committed my life to working particularly on the visibility of trans and non-binary folks.
Hmm.
So I've always been privy to hormone replacement therapy and gender affirming care. Although I honestly did not think I qualified for the right to transition, and we can get into that in more detail. But to answer your question, I came across this amazing organization called Plum,
Hmm.
which is an online service, but it is started by trans people and run by trans people for trans people. And
Mm,
basically, it is a full service that helps you get all your gender affirming care that you could possibly need.
hmm.
And I get to work with a doctor who is also of the trans experience, who not only knows, my needs and understands my relationship with my body, but can also relate to me in terms of the social transition and in terms of the emotional and mental, boot camp that transitioning can sometimes put you through, or having to socially assimilate and all of those difficult things. And having someone who can relate on those levels,
Hmm.
it makes it so much more different. And it makes me far more confident in myself and in the care that I'm receiving as I'm venturing on this new journey.
Of course. And I guess for anyone watching who doesn't know what plume is, how would one kind of find that or go about that?
Yeah, so the website is Get Plum.
Mm,
So basically, it is a service that you can opt into. That HRT is very expensive,
mhm,
which is why they have an HRT Access Fund, which I'll be fundraising for tomorrow
mm,
with Point of Pride. So basically, Point of Pride helps get gender affirming care. That's everything from binders, laser hair removal, to hormone
mm.
replacement therapy, to people of low income who need support in paying for their hormone, because this is expensive. It is
Yeah,
a very expensive thing.
yeah.
So and they help you in how to apply to the
Mm,
HRT Access Fund. And then it's basically we use this kind of like texting app with my doctor. So I can I can talk to my doctor 24/7,
oh, wow.
and they will get back to me, with whatever answers or concerns that I have. And it was surprisingly very easy for me to kind of sign up for this service.
Mhm,
Um, Basically, I was contemplating for a while. I scheduled my consultation with one of their doctors, and I was able to talk about my relationship with my body,
yeah.
my goals. I think it's important to mention that goals for trans people are very different across the board. Not
Mm,
everybody is seeking to fit into, a binary ideal or fit into the man woman binary. And, I fall under that. So I think having someone who can relate and
of
not just
course.
assume that my desire is to become a passing woman, those just
Mm,
that kind of leniency for me to sort of explore and ask questions without that judgment or that implication of what I want. It's
mm.
truly a dialogue, and it's a learning experience with me and my doctor, and I feel very, very confident in the level of care that I'm receiving.
Amazing. Yeah, I was gonna ask you, what were your fears and goals of seeking treatment?
Yeah, I think so. It goes back to that belief of I did not think I qualified for the right to transition. I think I've had a lot of trouble with, the narratives that are out there are often so, especially around about trans people and the trans journey, um, is so centered around fitting into the man-woman binary. I
Mm,
think society has a really easy time with digesting the fact that trans, in their definition, is a man wanting to be a woman or a woman wanting to be a man. You just want to mark the F box instead of the M box. It's simple enough to them to understand that and process
mhm,
that. And I think for a while, I believe that to be true too.
mm.
So, and understandably so, I think I can't be the only trans person out there that might feel that way, because when the only narratives that we're being given in the media or the mainstream only share the view of one type of trans experience.
When did you realize there was a different narrative?
I think it's been over the course of 4 years where that belief eroded.
Mm,
I helped to start the Fluid Project, which is trademarked the world's first gender-free store here in Soho. And it also served as a community space for the LGBTQ community, but specifically, it really became this microcosm for the trans experience in America. And I had my first exposure to trans people of all types, to non-binary people of
mm,
all backgrounds. And it really showed me the full breadth of the gender spectrum and showed me that there are options.
mm,
So I think as I began to get more exposed to this, that belief began to erode away. I think I've had some other, things baked on that. Like I have this complex of, wanting to be perfect for other people, and my belief that to transition or to be trans made you unlovable or potentially undesirable, and to transition would mean I need to be okay with a lonely existence. But,
mm,
that also was a false belief that I had to take the time to erode, because it took seeing real trans people have these healthy, loving relationships that I was able to consider the fact that, maybe I can transition and I am worthy of that type of love, instead of trying to fit into other people's boxes to consider myself worthy. And that was a big internal kind of battle I had to face when ultimately deciding to start this journey.
yeah.
Um, and I think another, fallacy is that and to speak plainly and bluntly, because I'm not ashamed of this experience at all, was the belief that I had to have this aversion or this hatred for my male body, or more
Mm,
specifically, my penis.
mhm,
I recognize where I'm lucky in this situation because I was born in a non-traditional male body, right? I am not tall. I don't have big muscles. I'm not hairy. I am very lucky to have been born with a more feminine disposition, right? But I never had that sort of hatred for my
mm,
penis specifically.
mhm,
So I did not think that that warranted me the right to transition. And it
mm,
took learning, like the fact that transgender relationships with our bodies are so unique and
mhm,
so like particular to the individual. And just because I don't have that aversion to my penis, just because I use penis for sexual pleasure, does not make me or diminish me from this trans experience or not being trans enough, which is something that I've always kind of felt even from within the community, is this feeling of like, well, you don't fit this category, so you don't qualify. And
mm,
what I kind of want to pose is the belief of, you know, what if I am a third gender? What if it isn't a
mhm,
matter of being, man or woman, or a trans man or a trans woman? Like, what if I exist as the third and I truly, feel that way inside? And it just took really chipping away at these fallacies
mhm,
before I was ever even able to entertain the decision to start gender affirming care and start taking an estrogen.
mhm. And I know you've been taking estrogen for the past almost 4 months now, correct?
Almost 3 months. So my
Oh,
first day was January 4th. So April 4th will mark the end of month number 3 and the start of month number 4.
And in these past few months, do you think the treatment has affected your gender dysphoria?
Definitely. I think before starting hormone replacement therapy, it was like something felt really trapped about the experience. I felt like I was on a one-way ticket to a future that I did not want, that I was inevitably going to age like a man, and there was nothing that I could do about it. It makes you venture to the darker parts of your brain that most people would rather not go, and people who feel trapped end up looking at alternative options to get out, and they're not always the best way. So last year in 2020, I got to a point where I was incredibly debilitated because of gender dysphoria. And while my penis wasn't the source of my dysphoria, I think there were other things, other sexual characteristics that really affected me. Specifically, and I've talked very openly about this, is the onset of secondary sex characteristics when it pertains to being a sex assigned male. We experience things like hair loss and thicker facial hair later in life. And these things were viscerally affecting me. And like, before someone confuses that as something as mere vanity, it's not as simple as that. It is this reminder that you are literally indentured to live this experience that you don't want to live. So it got to a point where I was so debilitated upon waking up that I just didn't want to get out of bed. I didn't want to participate in life if that was going to be my life. And ultimately, that moment was, I think, around November and December of 2020. And that's when I knew that I had to do something, and I wasn't going to take the easy way out. I was going to start hormone replacement therapy, and I was going to just live my truth regardless of what category I needed to fit in or trying to categorize myself. I said, screw it. I'm going to do this because I want to do this without categorizing myself. Since starting, my relationship with myself is night and day. You can tell in just my depth and my disposition, my joy that I've felt over the last couple of months. It feels like I am actively choosing myself every single day, and I'm choosing a future that I want for myself. And it feels really, really good.
Well, you look super great, and
Thank
I'm
you.
happy you're here to share your story. And during that time, the past, like in November, did you have a support system in place to kind of talk through different things you were going through?
Absolutely. I think, as queer people, I think chosen family is incredibly important. And I
Of course.
talk about this on my platform too, about the impact my chosen family has had on my life. I think everybody deserves to find a group of people who love them for them unconditionally. And, I want to remind people that it exists out there, for someone even in the most remote places. I'm telling you, it exists, and that we should not stop until we achieve that level of acceptance, because we all deserve it.
Exactly. No, I think that's my whole life. I was just like, all I wanted was just to find that core group, right? Just to have one or two people to talk to. It could really just like make the biggest impact, you know?
Yeah, it's life-changing, honestly. And I have been very blessed to have, a sibling who is really involved in this experience with me. And I have this amazing cousin. Her name is Lauren. And, she is just like, my biological sister as well. And having that kind of support system, who just so happens to be my blood family, although I know that isn't the case for most people, queer people. I've been blessed in that sense, that I do have some people in my family that love me unconditionally and support me endlessly. And I'm so grateful. And it exists out there for everybody. And I want to let everybody know that they shouldn't stop until they find it.
That's right. I know you go by they, she pronouns. How has that been going for you?
Good. I think so. I've identified with they, them pronouns for quite a few years. I think touching on, my transition goals, while I don't have I'm having a hard time self-identifying as a trans woman because I think the inclusion of woman is indicative of me seeking to achieve a Eurocentric, colonialized view of what a woman is and what womanhood is. And so I don't identify with that yet. Now I say yet because I learned that I will never speak to my identity in finite terms. I know that my identity is forever growing and forever changing. So I won't say I don't identify as a trans woman. Right now, just a little bit of a hard time. So I identify as trans or trans feminine or non-binary. I do use they, them pronouns, and I use she, her pronouns. I prefer, and I think I will get to a place where I am very comfortable, but I prefer she, her pronouns. But right now, I don't lead with that because I think it requires that context behind my gender identity. And I'm still in such a vulnerable stage of this transition that I'm just not ready for that critique or that sort of pushback from people. So I hold that dear to me, and the people closest to me refer to me as she, her.
Okay.
I also do accept they, them.
Okay.
But yeah, that's where I'm at with that right now. I think that journey in itself has taught me to not force a category or label on myself so much.
Yeah.
And that, like I said, anything pertaining to my identity, I try not to speak in finite terms because I think I told you this, but I've made the mistake of telling my mom in the past that, and I hate that I said this, but I said, I sent her Janet Mock's book, Redefining Realness, one of my favorite books about the trans experience and the journey to womanhood. And in the book, I wrote, don't worry, I'm not trans. But I want to expose you to the world that I'm committed to serving. And at the time, I think I said that to sort of ease her anxiety. But I regret it so much because I'm in the process of writing this letter to her and I need to backtrack and now deconstruct that sort of what I said. And I hate that I put myself in a box like that. And from that moment forward, I literally have made a promise to myself that I will never, ever, ever speak to my identity in such a finite way because I am ever growing, I am forever expanding, and how I feel today might not be reflective of how I feel tomorrow. I am just figuring it out just as much as everybody else. And I ask the people around me to have that same sort of leniency and that same sort of flexibility as I'm going down this journey and just exploring.
Of course. And I love the way how you phrased all of that. I think it's also giving you a break of feeling all the feelings at once and allowing yourself to have that space to continue to grow.
I think that, you know, the biggest hurdle in accepting my transness was accepting the fact that I may not fit into a box, or I might not belong anywhere, or I might not categorize. You know, I think as a queer person, you grow up, you never fit in. And I think you look for places to belong and you're chasing. And I realized, you know, my journey is not about finding a place to belong. It's about belonging to myself. It's about being in a body that makes me happy. So ultimately, that is what led me to this decision or to this belief that, listen, I am not going to categorize myself at all. I prefer to use terms like non-binary or transgender, these umbrella terms that encompass, you know, this community, because I am not going to put myself in that box.
So from Rhode Island, what was the process of coming to New York and kind of finding community here? I feel like anyone coming into a new city, right? It's exciting, it's kind of nerve-wracking. How was that experience for you?
Well, I sort of stumbled into New York, I think as some people do. I think New York calls to them. In Rhode Island, I didn't really fit in. And before Rhode Island, I lived in Boston and I didn't quite fit in there either. I didn't find that sense of community that I ended up finding in New York.
Yeah.
So my cousin lived in New York and I went out to meet her. And I ended up landing an internship and I met a boy. And about 3 months later, I moved here. And that was 7 years ago. And it was through this, I think I had so much anger and resentment towards my family when moving here that I had this fire inside of me that was like, I'm going to prove them wrong. And
Mm-hmm.
I put all of my energy into my career and into my work. And I worked tirelessly. And I had a couple Devil Wears Prada-esque experiences. But those experiences, as difficult as they were, they led me to meet Rob Smith, whom I opened the Fluid Project with in 2018. And though that 2 years that I helped to open that store and build that brand impacted my life forever, impacted my chosen family, my view on the gender binary, and my view of my own identity. And yeah, and I think it just took sort of riding the ride and letting life sort of expose itself in that sense. I think I would have inevitably gotten to this point in my life where I was to transition and was to start gender affirming care. I think maybe if I had access to this information or this sort of point of view earlier on, I would have started it far earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I know that I'm exactly where I need to be. And I would have gotten here eventually,
Mm-hmm.
but that's just the path that I had.
So I know in the beginning of the interview, you were talking about writing letters to your family, and how's that process going?
Yeah, so I've made a personal commitment to myself to sort of step into my truth by March 31st, which is Trans Day of Visibility. I know that it's not a necessary pressure to put on myself to come out by a certain day. But for me, that sort of deadline works because I have such a desire to step into my truth
Mm-hmm.
that I knew if I put a deadline on it, I would work on this sort of letter, which has taken me months to figure out the language and what to put in it. And right now, I'm writing this letter for my mom, and she's great and came to accept my sexuality when I came out as gay. But I think she's a little bit more rooted in a traditional sense and very cognizant of what other people might think. So it's a difficult one, and I'm anticipating this to be the most difficult person in my family when it comes to accepting my transition. So it's been difficult writing this letter, and as traumatic as coming out is and how much I hate the process, I think reversely that there is something positive to this, because every time I write it down or write my feelings of how I feel about my identity, the more that the language I'm equipped with to speak to this. And that's why I feel so confident coming here and talking to you about this. This coming out experience has sort of made me committed to putting my journey of transition out there, because
Mm-hmm.
I know that when I was contemplating my transition, it was hardly any narrative out there, trans narrative about the transition experience that I felt spoke to me. And I knew that like, I need to talk about this. I need to be equipped with language to speak to this educated.
Mm-hmm.
So the coming out has been difficult and hard, but reversely, it's been a really good exercise for me to equip myself with that language and to align with, myself inside. I know I feel these feelings, but I think a lot of the times we lack the means of expressing these feelings.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's something healing about writing
I
it down.
agree. I agree. And I think, I'm someone who naturally, when I'm obsessed about something, I sink in and I learn as much as I can. Right.
Mhm.
And I think when it comes to this particular topic, this is my whole life. This is my livelihood. So that obsession is like times 10. So I'm over here, I actually have a great book, Transgender Studies Quarterly. So it's a compilation of journals, of scientific journals, of stories, of trans history. So I'm sort of now committed myself to being as educated as I possibly can about this trans experience, so that in situations like this, I can speak eloquently to my experience, but also in situations where I am combated with hate or transphobia, I am equipped to handle that situation, and I am grounded in my opinions and in the knowledge that I have.
Hmm.
Because I had a very crazy experience at the beginning of my transition with someone who started really invasive questions and put me on the spot with some things that I wasn't yet prepared for or wasn't yet exposed to. So since then, I've been committed to really learning as much as I can and finding the language.
I think once we all find our niche of what we want to do, it's just nothing stopping us, right? You're just going to keep going and researching and
Mm.
gathering as much information as we can get, right?
Yeah, and I think there's something that has given me solace when it comes to that sort of thing. I think, researching the trans experience, especially trans history about, third gender people and indigenous American cultures, two-spirit, and in cultures in India and the Philippines and Thailand, where they have this community and sense of language that dates farther back than the term transgender. These were people who were recognized within their communities,
Hmm.
and some of them oftentimes respected as, shamans and spiritual leaders. And having that sort of existence validated throughout history, there is something really beautiful about that and affirming to myself. Um, so yeah, and it's sort of given me an outlook of, hey, Preston, you've been put on this planet to help increase the visibility of the trans experience and to educate other people and to give them the opportunity to take hard looks at their identity,
Hmm.
on the gender binary, on basically who said we need to prescribe to these rules.
Hmm.
I'd love to speak to the person someday because, I'd love to know why.
Hmm.
And I want to encourage everybody to ask that question about life, everything in life, not just gender.
I completely agree. I mean, that's why I started this project to hopefully build a platform where anyone coming on can find someone maybe they can relate to or, similar to experiences and they could take something away from a conversation or, process certain words that we talk about or situations. So,
Absolutely. And I'm
of
so grateful that you've asked me to be on this. It's
course.
been a long time, but I think this timing is so amazing because of where I'm at on this journey and, the sense of peace that I'm at. This is
Mm.
just could not be at a better time for me. And I'm very grateful for you giving me the platform to talk about this.
Of course. And, just thank you for sharing all of this and, best of luck with you tomorrow. And you are glowing right now. And I can like feel it. I can just feel you and you're just leading your truth, and I think that's what all of us can really just hope to do, right?
I'll be sharing video journals about my transition, and I will be getting very raw and vulnerable about my experience. And they can be found on my website. It's www.prestonjsouza@gmail.com.
If you have enjoyed this interview, give us a like and subscribe to our YouTube channel on Queer Link. Thank you.
Thank you.